Hi everyone. My name is Bharat Kumar, and I work as a GPU advocate in NVIDIA. Today we are starting a new session on GPU architecture and something that would change the way you have been looking at different aspects so far related to MPI, OpenMP, and all. So welcome to the session. Um, the GPU sessions is primarily into these modules. It has been actually put into several modules. Today, the session will be taken by me, which is the introduction to GPU architecture. It will not have any hands-on session. From the next lecture, you will start getting into the coding part, and slowly and steadily, you will cover different GPU memory hierarchies, followed by directive-based programming, different approaches to GPU programming, not just one way. We will end the session of the GPU programming with a case study. So that's how the overall modules are scheduled for you. The objective of this particular session is to, first of all, even motivate you in terms of why GPU computing is a new standard from a historical perspective. Then we will get into details of the fundamentals of the differences between the architectures. GPU is an architecture, and we need to figure out on why is it different from the other architectures that you have been traditionally working on, followed by certain aspects of GPU programming, um, which will help you in realizing how the overall architecture looks like and how will you be able to use it in a programming environment. So that's the overall goal. It's primarily towards making you familiar with the GPU programming. Let's take a walk into the history itself. If I look at it from a point of view of the architectures, earlier we used to have single core or a single CPU machine attached with a memory. Used to have memory, and there was a sequential programs that were written to make use the data used to be stored in the memory. Primarily, this would relate to your sequential programs. And it used to give us certain amount of performance, maybe megaflop. As you would know by now that we calculate the speed of an architecture by floating point operations per second, and the earlier architectures were as slow as, I would say, at that time they were fast, but today we'll call them as slow. They used to give around few megaflops of performance. In order to cross the barrier of megaflop and move on to the gigaflop era, um, a single core or a single CPU machine was not enough. And we moved on from a single core architecture to a multi-core architecture, still called as a shared memory because the CPUs used to share and get the data from the same memory. But what does it mean for us? It means that we just don't have the change in architecture. The programs also had to be changed. They had to be basically written using new standards like OpenMP or pthread programming, where parallelism needs to be identified inside the code, and then different parallel activities will run in the different CPU codes. So not just the hardware, but also the software architectures changed. Same thing happened when we moved on from the gigaflop era to the teraflop era. A single node was not enough, and then we had to connect multiple of these kinds of nodes together via high speed and low latency networks. Nowadays, you get up to 200 gigabits per second speed via the InfiniBand network. It's not the same network that you traditionally see at your home, which is the Ethernet network, which is 10 Gbps with a very high latency. These are very, very high speed interconnect networks. And this was used to move on from the gigaflop era to the teraflop era. Now, this again required the programmers to change their programming model from a shared memory architecture to a distributed memory architecture. Now, you have already gone through this cycle already, where you moved your code to OpenMP, which was the second block in the middle, which was the multi-core program, and then you also learned MPI programming, which was necessary for you to distribute the work not just within the node but across the nodes. What does this tell us? HPC system evolutions have happened to cross this barrier, and with the cross of barrier from an architecture level, you do also cross these barriers in the form of changing your software by learning new programming models. So let's look at it from a point of view of, again, what does this mean? So the golden age, also referred to as 1977 or 2017, where a lot of bottlenecks or the overheads in terms of making use of this parallel hardware was lesser and lesser given to the software or the domain scientist. These were the stunning 40 years. With every new architecture, the new CPU used to give almost 50% more improvement year on year, which meant almost 106 times faster throughput, which was given by the traditional CPU based architectures. This performance was not just because of the new architecture, it has many fundamental changes the way it evolved. We went from 8-bit to 16-bit to 64-bit operating system, which also refers to as change in the instruction sets which were given by the processor architectures. Same thing was instruction level parallelism. You would have seen it so far that nowadays the architectures don't execute one instruction per clock cycle. They are capable of running multiple instructions. So if you write a code like A equal to B plus C, D equal to J plus K, both these instructions are independent of each other. So the compiler creates a code and it gives it to the hardware in such a way that both these instructions can run in parallel. Similarly, we went from a single core to a multi-core processor. Nowadays you get cores up to 40 cores are possible per socket, and that also resulted into higher number of performance which was provided by the CPU. At the same time, the clock rate, or also referred to as frequency, kept on increasing because the higher the frequency of a processor, the faster it can execute, and hence giving your sequential code much more performance without making any fundamental changes in the software or the code itself. This was primarily driven by two laws. Moore's law is, you would have already seen, refers to as the number of transistors increasing every 18 months, also may be proportional to the amount of performance that the software used to get with the latest architectures. The the another law, which is also the one which supports the Moore's law, is also referred to as the Dennard scaling law. What you see here in this particular slide is the physics behind what Dennard scaling says. And if you look at the formula which is given here, is the energy per chip, which made the Moore's law continue, is given as follows. It is capacitance into voltage square into frequency into transistors, which means that if I were to keep the energy of my chip consistent, I have to reduce one of the right hand side. If I'm increasing the frequency, I'm improving the performance, but the energy of the chip cannot be increased, because if you keep on increasing the energy and frequency, the amount of heat dissipation was also with the higher range. So we used to increase the transistors, we used to increase the frequency, but then we had to reduce something else, and that was the voltage. With every new generation, the voltage kept on reducing, and hence you would have seen your previous generation architectures or the processors never asked for more amount of power. But that kind of stopped. Dennard scaling held till 1997. After that, it kept on, the power per chip kept on increasing as you increase the transistors and frequency. And you would see that when we went from 45 nanometers to 16 nanometers, there was a 3x increase in the energy per chip. So with the end of Dennard scaling, it became really difficult to sustain the Moore's law and keep on increasing the frequency and keep on increasing the cores just like that. Also, energy consumption became a very important for users. If you look at from an industry point of view, the processors are not just used for high performance computing. They are being used for cloud computing. They are also used in mobile markets. Energy has become really important. Today we are talking about exaflop systems. If we want to create exaflop level of systems, we cannot keep on increasing and asking for more and more power, and indirectly also asking for more and more cooling, because it's not sustainable at all. So the processor reached their power limit, and the thermal dissipation maxed out. Architectural advances like also things like instruction level parallelism was also very, very limited. It's finally up to the programmer how they write the program. When I write a program, I need to take care of the next instruction I'm writing should be independent of the previous instruction. If I don't do that, the compiler has limited visibility in terms of making that happen. Now that also results into very, very low performance for the older generation piece of softwares or high performance computing softwares which were written, because I need to change those, right? Otherwise, I cannot make use of the instruction level parallelism. Also, multi-cores are the something that I said, you right now are a state where you get up to 40 cores in the CPU side of it. Again, this is another case study which was done as part of the exascale computing project. When we started talking about exascale, you can see the evolution which is there. In the earlier days, if I wanted to go from gigaflop to teraflop to petaflop to now exaflop systems, if we see earlier, if I give you a new card or a new processor, 32x will come from transistors and 32x will come from parallelism. That means I will add parallelism like OpenMP. Along with that, the transistors will help me in getting there. When I went to petaflop, transistors play a lower role, but how we redefine our algorithms, how we rewrite our softwares used to give more and more performance, without which you cannot cross this barrier of petaflops. When I talk about exaflop, it becomes much, much more important. Adding parallelism to your code and making sure that you're using the system efficiently by rewriting your codes became really, really important in order to reach this stage. So the importance of changing the hardware, the motivation from going from the traditional CPU based architecture was quite evident when we started moving into the GPU era. Now, before going there and getting into the GPU architecture, why GPU solves all this problem, let us now look at from a point of view of the code itself, and then we'll get into the details of how the architecture is different, why it solves all these problems. If this was a problem from BLAS1 routine, basic linear algebra routine, which is also referred to as SACP operation, what you are doing is you are multiplying a scalar value a with a vector x and then adding it to another vector y and storing it into vector y again. If you are doing this and if you have written your program sequentially, say in a C code, it will basically execute in this fashion, that first it will execute the 0th index. So it will do y of 0 equal to a star x of 0 plus y of 0. And similarly, it will keep on doing it till you have reached your limit, which is I is less than n. Once you exceed that, you will come out of it. This has been a traditional way of writing code onto the CPU. Now look at this, that this is all complete sequential C syntax. If I were to move to a equivalent CUDA or a GPU code, it's still C, but what you see here is that I've added some additional keyword. My function name is this. I'm passing it the parameters X and Y, A and N, and I'm trying to invoke that function. Now the difference is that even though it is still a C code, and you will see in the future lectures what are these functions, but just to show you a very short glimpse of it, when I declare this function as a special functions, like also referred to as a global function, this function will run in parallel on the GPU. And how many threads I am launching? The number of threads I am launching is 256 into the number of blocks, which means that I am launching thousands of threads onto the GPU. Each and every thread is going to run this function called as axp underscore parallel, and every thread is going to access its own data, which is y0 equal to a star xi plus yi. Every thread gets it indexing here via a index, which is also the thread index. Since you have already done OpenMP programming, you would be aware that every thread gets its own index. Based on the index, you can actually execute this function. So what is so different? It's very similar. You're launching many threads. You are defining a function with a special keyword, and based on the index, you are basically doing some operation. That's what CUDA programming is. So as I said, it's the same thing. The sequential code gets converted into a parallel code. where GPU core 0 runs the 0th index, GPU core 1 will run it for the first index, and like this you will have thousands of cores and thousands of threads running on those cores in parallel. So it's all about parallelism when I talk about the GPUs. Now let's look at the differences in the CPU and GPU architecture into more detail, because if it is the same, then what makes it so special? Now let's look at that. If I look at it from a von Neumann architecture, which some of you might have read during your computer science days, if you're from computer science background, any processor that you get today is a typical von Neumann architecture. It has a processing unit. A processing unit has a arithmetic and logic unit which does all the arithmetic and logical function. It has an associated register file from where it picks up the data. There is a memory. That memory is the one where you store your data. This memory gets the memory gets read, put into the register file where the ALU executes it. And you might also read it from a IO, which is input output like a file system. Also, the two important units which decides which instructions to execute is by the control unit, which is also having two counters, specific counters called as program counter also. And also there is an instruction register which is usually used. So based on the program counter and the logic, the control unit decides which instruction to execute and then which data to pick up, and your arithmetic and logic unit basically executes that. The three components, as I said, of the processor, which I just highlighted for you, if you look at any processor, it has a silicon budget. The number of transistors which go there will be divided into these three main components: arithmetic and logic unit, control, and cache. If you look at it from a CPU perspective, the number of ALUs, or the number of cores as you would like to call them as, is lesser. The maximum number of cores that you see per socket is in the range of around 40 cores. The control unit is very high. When the CPUs were born, they were actually supposed to do not just parallel computing, they were supposed to run different multiple tasks, like running your operating system. At this point of time, I am running 10 different applications on my system, including PowerPoint. I'm doing it on a GoToMeeting, and there are multiple other, my Outlook is open in terms of mails. All this requires different kinds of control changes in terms of execution. Because you have a limited ALU, the operating system basically decides based on the scheduling policies which one to run, and it is a very high in number because that's the nature of running an operating system, right? Now it also has a large amount of cache attached to it because of the nature of the kind of problems that it solves, because we are switching from one to the other applications. So you see, this is the nature of a CPU. What about GPU? GPU has the same amount of silicon budget. So what makes it difference? It, as a fundamental change, what the GPU said was that I'm very good at doing something and let me concentrate and put all of my silicon for that use. So it allocates a lot of that transistors for ALU, which means instead of having lesser number of cores, you will see in the GPUs you have thousands of cores. It has very less amount of control unit, which means that it says that I'm not very good at running other things like running an operating system and all, running multiple different kinds of tasks. Maybe I can't run MPI applications which are working on different types of things, but I can run something which has which falls into this Flynn's taxonomy called as single instruction multiple data, which means every thread executes the same instruction but on multiple data. So that's why I don't need to have a lot of control units. Also, the caches are present, but they are meant for different purpose. We'll get into that. And also they are very less in number. So what I'm trying to tell here is both of them are processors, both of them are architectures. It just within the same budget of the silicon, within the same budget of the processor. It's the decision in terms of what needs to be used more and what needs to be used less makes the overall goal. So if I were to again go back to the von Neumann architecture, you would see something like this. what you will see is that you have the same GPU. Obviously, it still follows the von Neumann architecture. You will see the processing units on the right hand side, but you have more number of processing units. You have the same ALU, you have resistors, and also you have the control unit, but it does a very, very limited amount of effort that needs to be put in. Along with that, GPU memory is called as a global memory, which we'll come to later on. So it also has its own memory. It is not the same memory that the CPU has, it has its own memory. So if you see from a point of view, both of them are von Neumann, but they basically decide to have more number of computing power. Now, let's go into the more detail of each and every thing. From an accelerated computing point of view, again, this is a cartoonish figure or animated, which kind of shows you the silicon budget. What you see on the left hand side is a limited set of cores. On the right hand side, what you see is GPU having many more number of cores. And on the left hand side, you see is that the CPU actually allocates is a large portion of this data of its silicon budget to something else, like more number of control units and as well as cache, while GPU has it at a much, much more level. Let's look at this difference by going into each of them. Please note that we are nowhere saying that one architecture is better than the other. It's just that it is being used for a particular purpose and it's meant for doing that particular part. And I will come to that. And that's why what you see here is a plus sign. You don't see an oblique here. What it means is that we will make use of both these architectures together to make something better as compared to using only one of them. And that's why GPUs are also referred to as accelerators, because they accelerate your code over top of what CPU has been already doing. It's not an alternative. Let's look at the strengths and weaknesses of the CPUs. Uh, what you see here are some of the strengths. CPU has very large memory. As you would know that today we are in the 64-bit instruction set or 64-bit operating system. Practically the amount of memory that you can have in one node is 2 raised to 64, which is few terabytes. So you can actually allocate few terabytes of memory. One good thing about CPU is that each and every core is very fast. What does it mean? That every core actually runs at a very higher frequency. If you look at the CPU processors and if you read the specifications, you will see nowadays CPU cores run at almost 4 gigahertz. The higher the frequency, every core runs very, very fast. So if you are able to fit your overall thing within this 40 cores, then in that case, it will run very, very fast if you had 40 parallel tasks to work on. They are also referred to as latency optimized architectures via the large caches. And I will come to that part below as I'm going to show you in a short while. Smaller number of threads can run very quickly. I already told you. If you can have the number of threads equivalent or the number of processes equivalent to the number of cores, or if you would have the number of I would say equal to maybe the double number is still fine, right? Um, so these were the strengths. What about the weaknesses, right? So let's look at the weakness. It has a very low memory bandwidth. So if you look at the RAM, which is typical DDR4 that you get with CPU, the read speeds and the write speeds of it is in the range of around 200 gigabytes per second. Now you might wonder why I am talking about it. You might have seen that not all applications are compute bound, which means that even if I give you more compute, but if your application is memory bound, what you should look in a processor is memory speed and not compute and not number of cores. To give you an example, if I have a very simple code which says A equal to B plus C, if you have a for loop across arrays, what you're doing is you're trying to read B, you're trying to read C, and then store it in A. So there are three memory operations here, two reads and one writes. But the amount of ALU or the arithmetic and logic unit that you're doing there is basically only one, which is addition. So look at the ratio, it's 3:1. So if I want to compute, before that I should be spending at least 3 clock cycle on reading it. So what matters in those kinds of application is higher memory bandwidth. You'd be surprised to know many of the domains like computational fluid dynamics and all, they are bound by memory and not by compute. So even if you give them more compute, they might not perform as good as what we are doing. um, the cache misses are very, very costly. To give you an example here, what you see here are two kinds of different data structures. The data structures are here. If I were to store an image, this image basically is storing RGB values and also hue and saturation. If I were to store this image in this particular format, and if I were to try and access the CPU versus this structure, so the fundamental difference here is that I am storing all the R components together. Instead of storing it in RGB, I am storing it in all the R's together, all the G's together, and all the B together. Now, one of this data structure is very, very efficient because one of them is very, very cache friendly. Now, why I'm saying this is because if you don't design your data structures in considering this part, and if you make use of CPUs, you will basically also result into very, very high cost in terms of cache misses, and you won't be able to utilize the CPU very efficiently. Also, another part of the GPU is the CPU is that it has very low performance per watt. All the CPUs run at a very high frequency, and if you would have seen the formula that I showed you in the Dennard scaling part, is that the higher the frequency, the amount of performance that you need, the amount of energy that you need to power is also higher. So CPUs are also not so green in nature. If you look at the Green 500 list, which has been published, which keeps on getting published twice a year, most of the green supercomputers are either based on some form of the other of accelerators. Now let's move on and look at accelerated computing from a GPU standpoint of view. What are the strengths of GPU? The one of the biggest strengths of GPU has a very high bandwidth main memory. If you look at the memory of CPU, I said it gives you around 200 gigabytes per second. Today, the latest GPU provides you more than 1 terabytes per second memory bandwidth. Now that's very, very efficient. So if you were memory bound, and if I were to give you thrice the bandwidth, your performance of that particular memory bound kernel would be very, very high. It has more number of compute resources. As I said, GPUs nowadays come with thousands of cores. To give you an example, the Volta architecture today gives you 5120 cores. That's one GPU. These are different cores. As I said, the amount of logic which goes in this core is very much limited as compared to your CPU, because the CPU has to do much more task in terms of control units and all that I talked about. While GPU cores are very simple, they just execute an instruction, they take the data and execute the instruction. That's why they are also referred to as simple cores. And GPUs are also called as high throughput, and they have a very good performance per watt. Every GPU core runs at a very, very low frequency. As I said, the CPU frequency of the cores is in the 4 gigahertz, while for GPU, every core runs 4 times slower today at 1 gigahertz of frequency. So every core is 4 times slower as compared to a CPU core, but you have thousands of them. That's the difference. And that makes it much more greener in nature, so that you can have high performance per watt and you can get more flops within the same power budget. It has relatively high memory capacity, relatively low memory capacity, sorry. This is the GPU weakness. So when we are able to provide you high memory bandwidth, that also results into the amount of memory that can be provided reduces in case of GPUs. In GPU, one GPU maximum can take almost 80 GB per GPU. So if you have a system with 8 GPUs, it would be around 640 GB is available for you in one system. You cannot go beyond that. So you can distribute your memory across these 8 GPUs and you can allocate 640 GB. Beyond that, it gets onto the CPU, and then you have to keep on transferring it. And we will get into the unified memory part later on in the few of the sessions later. But this is one of the bottlenecks which is there from, or the weakness which is there for the GPUs. Also, as I said, it's a low per thread performance, which means that if you execute a task which is a sequential task on the GPU versus a CPU, it will be 4 times slower on the GPU because every core is running at a lower frequency as compared to the CPU core. So what is really important is that we use GPU for the purpose it was meant to do. Also, from a point of view of execution, let's look at what is the fundamental difference in terms of execution between the CPU architecture and the GPU architecture. You can see here the CPU architectures are also called as latency reducing architecture. They are also referred to as latency reducing architecture, while the GPU are called as latency hiding architectures. Now, what does that mean? Let me maybe show you with a simple example, a very minimalistic example, and then we'll come back to this part. So let's take an example here. Suppose I was doing an operation which is a equal to B plus C. This is a very simple operation. If you look, this simple instruction behind the scenes will do multiple things. It will execute something called as load B into a register, say register 1. So I am loading the memory into a register. Similarly, the second operation which will be done is load C into register 2. This is the second instruction. So this one instruction in your code gets converted into multiple. Now the third instruction would be basically add operation that you do, add operation, and you will say R1 comma R2 and do this operation and store it in another register called as R3. And then you will do the store operation of this R3, which is the register 3 into A. So you can see here that your one instruction gets actually get uh, divided into multiple instructions within the architecture inside, which is hidden from you because compiler does this job for you, right? So suppose I had one core. This is a very hypothetical example. I had just one core and I had multiple number of threads with me. If I had multiple number of threads with me, T1, T2, T3. So if I were to execute, and this is my timeline, if this is my timeline. So T1 basically starts executing because it gets allocated here. There's only one core. It will start executing the first instruction, which is here, load. Now this load is reading from the memory. Reading from memory takes time. It may take almost like 6 to 8 clock cycles to read. So what does the thread do till that time? Because this instruction and this instruction is independent of each other, it starts executing the second instruction. It will not wait. It will start executing till the time B gets loaded. It will now see that again this will take few clock cycles to execute. Now it starts jumping to the third instruction. Now the third instruction, it cannot execute because it is dependent on the previous two instruction to execute. So both 1 and 2 should have executed before 3 executes. It cannot do anything at this point of time because it is taking time for it. What happens is that the scheduler changes from thread 2 and allocates it to thread 1. So now thread 2 starts executing this and starts executing the first instruction, which is here, right? Again it executes 1, it executes 2, again it gets bottlenecked. It can't execute anymore because it's going to take certain amount of time for this instruction to get the memory getting into the registers. Then it switches to thread 3. Now again it will execute 1 and 2. This is how it goes on. Now after this, what if the data is ready? What if the data is ready for this thread and it start executing 3? So if you see here, during this time when we were executing, if suppose this instruction took around 4 clock cycle, it would rather than wasting the time, it switched from thread 1 to thread 2 to thread T. This is called as context switching, or this is called as thread switching. Now this thread switching is basically very much efficient on the GPUs because on the GPUs we can actually launch thousands of threads unlike CPU. On the CPU, it's very, you usually run, the amount of threads that you run on the CPU is equal to the number of cores, or double the amount of it in case you had enabled hyperthreading. But more than that, it kind of slows down your overall system. While on GPUs, it is possible to launch more number of threads as compared to the cores. And that's why you can do this context switching, which I just talked about, very fast. And that's why GPUs are called as latency hiding architectures, because when one thread is working, you can see the three stages of your pipeline: processing, waiting for data, and then ready to be processed, right? So thread 1, when it starts executing, if it is waiting for something, it jumps to thread 2, thread 2 jumps to thread 3, thread 3 jumps to thread 4, and that's how you can overlap. So basically you are executing at every cycle rather than waiting for the data to come to you or waiting for anything else to come to you, right? While in case of CPU, what happens is that the CPU actually reduces the latency of bringing the data because it has very good amount of cache. And suppose on the GPU, if this instruction was taking 4 clock cycle, on the CPU it might take only 2 clock cycles because the cache is much more optimized. But still it cannot do this context switching. And that's the fundamental difference between the CPU and the GPU architectures, that GPUs are called as throughput based architectures, while CPU are called as more of latency optimized architectures. To give you a simple example again, if I was going from here to the airport, if I was alone, I would choose a bike, because bike is very much faster, and it helps me in different situations like traffic and all. And I can reach very fast, or maybe I can take one of you with me who is sitting behind on the bike. But what if I have to take all of you with me, all the 200 or 100 people along with me to the airport? In that case, if I had two bikes, three bikes, four bikes, maybe six of you can go together or eight of you can go together, but it has its own limitation. Instead of that, I can choose a bus, and a bus is much more efficient because it can take all of you together. It is slower as compared to a bike, but one thing is that it can take all of you. That's why GPUs are also called as throughput based architectures, and the CPU are also called as the latency optimized architecture. And the good part is, when I talk about GPU computing, I'm not talking about only GPU, because it's called as hybrid computing, because your application runs not just on the GPU, some part of your application runs on the CPU, some part of your application runs on the GPU. The sequential parts or the file IOs and all those, many of these operations basically can run very efficiently on the CPU. Multiple tasks like MPI calls can run very, very efficiently on the CPU. But when you have a for loop and you have data parallelism there, uh, in that case, that part can be given to the GPU. If you would have heard of something called as the 80-20 principle, which is also a general principle used, it refers to as 80% of time of your application is spent in 20% of the code. And that's the 20% which needs to run on a GPU. Rest all part can still go ahead and run on the CPU. Now, why is this important? Because of Amdahl's law. Is as simple as that your whole application cannot be made parallel. Certain part of it still is sequential in nature. If you remember Amdahl's law, which has been talked to you, it basically defines the amount of performance that you can expect out of the code is basically here. So 1 divided by 1 minus p. So if you have only 50% of the code which can be made parallel, 50% of the amount of time can be made parallel, in that case the maximum speed up that you can expect in a particular application is only 2x, because you're reducing the time by only half, right? So you need both the latency part and the throughput part of your application to be optimized. Another way of showing it on the left hand side, what you see is that you have some part on your application which is latency bound, some part is throughput bound. And you will see here that if I just reduce the throughput part running on GPU, the latency part still remains my bottleneck. If I just reduce, if I keep on doing this, it's not good. What I need to do is basically I need to make both A and B part parallel so that my overall application becomes faster. And that's what is referred to as heterogeneous computing or hybrid computing, where two kinds of processors are used. Why they are used? Because both of them are good at doing something. Let them do what they are very good at. Now, what's CUDA? We have been talking about GPUs, we have been talking about CPUs. So what is CUDA? CUDA stands for, it was an acronym which was for Compute Unified Device Architecture. Nobody spells it out in this form at this point of time. CUDA has become the architecture, and the programming model has become so famous that we don't have to expand it anymore. But the keyword there is CUDA is an architecture. The A stands for architecture. Now that's very important to understand. There are different kinds of architecture, like CPU has x86 architecture, IBM have its own architecture called as Power 9 in case of CPU. The most prominent architecture in the mobile space is ARM. All your mobile devices, the CPU is ARM there primarily. These are all different architectures. Every architecture has its own instruction set, which has these principles of instruction level parallelism, how many registers can be used, and all those things. Similarly, CUDA also has its own. It has its own memory and programming model. In the next set of series, that's what you are going to learn. But what I wanted to make clear is that CUDA is an architecture and it has evolved over time. Why is it important? As you would see that if you see why we ARM is really prominent and it is used in the mobile world, is that you will never buy a phone even if it is faster if its battery dies very fast. Why the battery dies? Because the processor is asking for a lot of basically power. So the architecture, which is very power efficient, is ARM. It was from bottom up. It was always made for one purpose, which was being power efficient. That's why it is playing a very important role in the mobile devices. Similarly, CUDA is an architecture. It was made always to be a parallel computing architecture. Let's look at the history of GPUs. GPUs stand for graphics processing unit. They were used for graphics, but if you look at graphics, what is graphics? It basically stands for doing rendering or doing things like, if you had an image, if you want to paint pixels on your screen, what you're doing is painting pixels on your screen. If the resolution was 1024 by 1024, you're deciding at every pixel what's the red, green, and blue value, right? And if you see that part that you are doing is actually can be done in parallel. So when GPUs were born, they were actually born for doing parallel computing, but it so happens that they were used only for graphics. And the way to use it for graphics was exposing languages like OpenGL and Vulkan at this point of time. Now, OpenGL and Vulkan could have been used even for general purpose computation, what we have been working on, like writing a sorting algorithm or writing a computational fluid dynamics algorithm. But as a domain scientist, I would not like to know the graphics pipeline. I would like to write in a C code or a Fortran code without getting into the graphics pipeline. And that's what CUDA is. So we make use of the GPU architecture and expose it to the user in form of a general purpose processor, also referred to as general purpose computing. And that's what CUDA stands for, using GPUs for general purpose computation. In order to do that, it exposes the programming model and also its own memory model. And over years, like your CPU, GPU also has overgone multiple fundamental changes in the architecture. The first GPU was born in terms of general purpose computation in 2007 when CUDA was born. Over that time, we have already gone through 6 generations of architectures. Whenever you buy a particular hardware, you will see a particular name or a architecture attached to it, starting from Kepler to Maxwell to Pascal, Volta, Turing, and now we are at an architecture which is called as an Ampere architecture. All these architectures have a fundamental capability, and also they are able to do certain justice in terms of different kinds of computation. Let me show you some examples so that you will get into those details later on. But when I talk about the GPU architectures, there are two main components there. The first one is the global memory, and the second one is the SMs, or also referred to as streaming multiprocessors. We have already seen the global memory part. It is analogous to RAM in your CPU server. So you say you have so much of RAM, similarly GPU has so much of RAM, also referred to as global memory. I already talked to you about the speed of it. The second most important component inside a GPU is also called as a SM, or a streaming multiprocessor, which does the actual computation. And each and every SM has its own control unit, registers, execution pipeline, and cache. Let's dive deep into the architecture itself, and specifically why this is very important for you to know. Every architecture of CUDA, like Kepler, Pascal, Maxwell, has a different SM architecture. Here on the right hand side, what you're seeing is a snapshot of one SM of Volta architecture. What you see here is a limited number of um, here what you see here is a set of cores which are supposed to do 64-bit precision or double precision units. Here what you see is X number of cores which are supposed to do only integer computation. What you see here are X number of cores which are supposed to do a 32-bit computation. There are some specialized cores here which are also called as tensor cores, which are very good when you want to do computations which are 16-bit, or also mixed precision, which are done on this tensor cores. Every core has its own scheduler, and it also has its own a cache hierarchy. Now, this is another fundamental difference between the CPU and GPU architecture, which I forgot to tell in the beginning, is that in case of GPU, the scheduler of a thread or instruction is basically a hardware unit or not a software unit. In case of CPU world, this whole responsibility of scheduling is given to the operating system, which is basically a software, not a hardware. While in case of GPU, there is a hardware scheduler which is there, which also helps in switching between threads, which I talked to you some time back, and also makes it much more easier for threads to context switch and without losing out onto any clock cycles. Now, why I'm showing you this is because, again, the point that I wanted to say was, with every architecture, you will get different amount of double precision, different amount of integer computation. If you are in crypto, then you would be mostly looking at integer computation. If you are in the AI world, you will be primarily looking at the tensor cores. Each and every SM has its own configuration in different architectures. Now, that's from the SM point of view. Now, let's look at the memory hierarchy. If I look at it from a memory hierarchy perspective, every thread basically gets its own registers. That's the definition of a register, which you have been seeing so far. Every thread has registers which are not shared at all. Also, threads get a specialized memory, also called as local memory, which is local for them, which does not fit into the registers, also called as a local memory, which is private per thread. It is not shared. Similarly, there is another memory which is called as shared memory, and that shared memory is basically, as the name itself tells, number of threads together can basically share amount of memory, so that you can actually do things like synchronization and all across different threads, otherwise which it's not possible. So if you want to share data between threads, the memory which is very, very important there is called as a shared memory. You will see that in your lectures over time, you're going to work on shared memory, global memory, and all in each and every lecture that you're going to have in the series. And again, as I said, the global memory is the one which is shared across all the threads and across all the blocks. So this is the memory hierarchy in CUDA. You have your global memory across, you have shared memory, which is basically shared across X number of threads together, and then the threads basically have their own private memory called as register and local memory. From a cache point of view, you would have already seen in the CPU side also, everything comes from the global memory or the RAM. It goes to L2 cache, which is shared across, and then finally per SM you can have it in the registers, or you can have it basically goes from L2 cache to L1 cache and to the registers. And also every SM has its own shared memory. So, and there is a specialized memory which will not go to at this point of time, and it's out of scope of this particular lecture series, also called as constant memory or read-only memory, which is specifically used for read-only data. We'll not be covering that part. So you will see your lecture, the first lecture after that, after when we go into the memory, first you're going to write a CUDA program, then you will see how to look at the global memory, then you will look at how to optimally use the shared memory, and that's how you will keep on optimizing your code further and further. Let's move next. I will not go into a lot of detail of the memory hierarchy. This is more for your reference purpose. The data from CPU gets copied to the GPU, and GPU and CPU are connected to each other via PCI. You will see that when you open your system, if you have a GPU, it sits on two kinds of IO connects. One is PCI. You would have heard this term called as PCI, PCI X16 slots. That's where your GPU is kept. So when I want to work on the GPU, first the data gets transferred from CPU to the GPU, then it goes to the cache, and finally it reaches either the shared memory and then the registers for executing. Why is it important? Is because of this reason. Because you can see that your CPU maximum bandwidth I told was around 200 gigabytes per second. My GPU is much more faster. The cache is almost way many orders of magnitude faster. As I keep on going further and further, it becomes faster and faster. So that's why it's very important that you utilize the memory very efficiently in the initial stages itself before utilizing it into your ALU. Otherwise, you will be bound by memory, and you will see that during your course. Again, this is another way of showing it. With every GPU architecture, you will see that there is a difference. Like in case of shared memory, earlier in the Kepler architecture, it was 624 KB. It went up to 7 MB also size per GPU. So over the generations, the memory became better and better. The memory bandwidth became better and better. So if you run on an older architecture, you will not get so much of speed up as compared to the newer generation architectures. You can see the bandwidth increased from 240 gigabits per second to 900 gigabytes per second, which is what is very important. So the same code runs on no matter which hardware you run on. You can run it on a higher end Tesla cards. You can run it on a lower end laptop cards. You can also run it on embedded Jetson cards. All of them have the same GPUs, but with the difference in the architecture and with the number of SMs, you will see that your speed keeps on varying based on what is the characteristics of the GPU. This is another example. Like in the older generation of the architectures, there was no Volta core. There was no tensor cores. It was introduced in Volta, and this core is a very specialized core which can do this matrix operation in one clock cycle very, very fast. So it can basically do the matrix multiplication in one clock cycle rather than doing it in a software way. You have a specialized core which does this matrix operation for you, and this is possible in Volta, and it primarily is 16-bit in Volta, but you also get 64-bit in case of Ampere architecture. So if you're that's why you will see that the AI operations are very fast in the Volta cards, while in case of the Ampere cards, you see that the double precision computation of matrix are also very, very fast. So each architecture brings its own goodness, and you will see it varying, and that's why there is no the CUDA architecture remains the same. It's just that with the better and better newer generation, your coding have become simple, and your performance have become better and better with the new generation of cores which have been put. With that, I would like to many of these parts that I showed you were primarily references which are kind of listed here. Initially, what I talked to you about was the end of general purpose processor. Was this study was done by Stanford, and many of these slides in the beginning have been taken from there, which kind of puts the base in terms of why general purpose processor needs to be appended with architectures like GPUs to make it much more faster. And also there are details about how the CUDA architecture looks like and how a particular SMC or particular architecture also looks like. With that, I would like to um, pause my sharing, and let's see if what all questions that I have.